How does a creature survive when the world itself seems designed to erase it? That is the question that lingers whenever one thinks of the direwolf, a beast both real and wrapped in the shadows of human imagination. They were not myths, though many stories made them larger than they truly were. They walked the same earth we do, padded across the same frozen soil, breathed the same sharp, cold air of the Ice Age. Yet, unlike us, they are gone now. Still, the memory of their survival, their strategies, their intelligence, their endless hunger for life, remains like an echo in the wind. If you listen long enough, you can almost hear them, the low growl rolling out from a snowy ridge, the rhythmic crunch of paws pressing down frost. And so we wonder, how did they live? How did they hunt? How did they endure for so many thousands of years? To imagine them, close your eyes and step back into that ancient world. The air is colder than anything you've felt, so cold it burns inside your nostrils with each breath. Your boots, or if you were barefoot as many creatures were, crunch down into ice-packed ground, where the grass is stiff with frost and the horizon glitters white beneath a pale sun. Herds move there, enormous shapes, mammoths with tusks like ivory scythes, bison so heavy the ground shakes when they stampede, horses with breath steaming in great plumes. Prey animals, yet also towers of muscle, dangerous and fast. And behind them, always behind them, shadows slink and linger, direwolves, moving together like a single thought stretched across many bodies. Unlike the solitary big cats of the Ice Age, the direwolf understood a truth that changed everything. Survival was not in the strength of one, but in the coordination of many. They hunted not as lone predators, but as family, as clan. Imagine the whisper of their paws moving in rhythm, each step timed to another, each ear pricked for signals, each tail flick a word unspoken. The pack was a living language, and in that language was survival. Alone, even a powerful wolf might starve. Together, they could bring down beasts far larger than themselves, feasting on meat that sustained them through the endless winters. The strategy began not in the chase, but in patience. Picture the wind on that tundra, thin, high, almost singing across the frozen ridges. The direwolves smelled everything it carried. A musk of bison dung, heavy and earthy, meant herds grazed nearby. The sharp copper tang of blood meant a kill, perhaps an easy meal if they arrived quickly. They could stand on a ridge, nostrils quivering, and read the air like scripture. And once the scent of prey was found, their bodies aligned in silent purpose. There was always a leader, though leadership was never fixed. It shifted like the river currents, depending on age, strength, or wisdom. One wolf might signal the direction with a glance, another with the twitch of an ear. It was never chaos. It was music flowing unbroken. They approached the herd not in blind rush, but in slow spirals, testing edges, finding weakness. To the eyes of those great bison, the wolves seemed like shadows flickering in and out of sight, never too close, never too far, always watching. The herd would stamp, shuffle, turn their heads with wide, rolling eyes. One wrong step, one moment of panic, and the balance would shift. The direwolves knew to wait. Hunger gnawed at their bellies, but strategy demanded patience. They sought the old bull who limped, the cow separated from her calf, the young who strayed too far from the center. Their eyes shone amber in the dying light, their breath steaming white, and when the moment came, they burst forth with terrifying unity. Their paws pounded the earth, tails streaming, voices rising in a chorus of howls, not wild noise, but a storm of sound meant to fracture the herd's mind. Fear spread through the bison like fire through dry grass. Dust, snow, and earth churned under pounding hooves, and the wolves threaded between them, aiming not for the strongest but for the vulnerable, the doomed. The chase was not always clean. Imagine the taste of blood in the air before teeth even found flesh, the sharp tang that comes when prey cuts itself in panic. Imagine the thunder in your chest as the ground shakes, the sound of bones creaking under the weight of giants fleeing for their lives. The direwolves lunged, bit, released, harried. One at the flank, one at the throat, another at the hock to bring legs crashing down. Their jaws were not designed for delicate precision, but for power, crushing bone, tearing meat. Once a bison stumbled, the rest collapsed into inevitability. The pack swarmed. Screams filled the air, then silence, and only the sound of ripping, chewing, growling remained. Victory meant warmth in the belly, meant pups fed, meant life a little longer. But hunting was never guaranteed. There were days of emptiness, when the prey proved too strong, when ice storms blinded their eyes, when their paws ached from frostbite, when the carcass they found had already been claimed by saber-toothed cats or short-faced bears. Hunger was constant. In those lean times, the direwolves turned to scavenging to cunning. They shadowed other predators, waiting for scraps. They gnawed bones until their teeth cracked, licked marrow until nothing remained. Even in death, they left little behind, only tracks and the faint smell of musk and blood upon the snow. The strategies they used were not only of teeth and speed, but of mind. They understood cooperation in ways that mirrored human hunters of the same era. Just as bands of people tracked mammoths and coordinated drives into pits or toward cliffs, the direwolves learned the rhythm of anticipation, the art of deception. Their hunts were echoes of our own, or perhaps ours were echoes of theirs. Some believe humans learned to respect them, perhaps even to watch and copy their patience, their use of wind, their timing. Stories say that when humans first looked into the eyes of wolves, they saw not only danger but reflection, something of themselves staring back. The direwolf's hunt carried meanings beyond survival. For humans who lived alongside them, the wolves were more than animals. They were symbols of endurance, of family, of the dangerous beauty of unity. The howling in the night was not just sound, it was a reminder of the wild forces beyond the fire's glow, forces that could take but also teach. In the stories whispered around those ancient fires, direwolves may have been spirits, guardians, or warnings. They taught that survival meant balance, between boldness and patience, between hunger and restraint, between the individual and the group. Close your eyes again and feel that ancient hunt with all your senses. The sight of snowflakes spinning in the wind, catching light like shattered stars. The sound of paws drumming across packed earth, of breath heaving in lungs that burn with cold air. The touch of fur brushing against fur as wolves run shoulder to shoulder, their bodies warmed by each other's nearness. The smell of sweat and blood, rich, metallic, heavy in the nostrils. The taste of raw meat on the tongue, life exchanged for life, strength passed from prey to predator. It was brutal, yes, but it was also sacred in its rhythm, in its necessity. Generation after generation, the direwolves refined their ways. Mothers taught pups to stalk, to listen, to hold back their energy until the final burst. Older wolves passed down silent lessons simply by surviving, by proving that strategy was sharper than fong. Through this knowledge, they endured for more than 100,000 years. Think of that span of time. Entire landscapes shifted, glaciers advanced and retreated, species rose and fell, and still the direwolves trotted onward, their shadows lengthening across frozen valleys. And yet, even the most perfect strategies can fail when the world itself changes. As the ice age melted away, the prey they relied upon dwindled. Mammoths vanished, horses scattered, giant bison fell silent in the fields. The direwolves had mastered the hunt of giants, but when the giants were gone, their skills turned brittle. They could not adapt quickly enough to the smaller, swifter animals that filled the world that followed. Their size, their heavy jaws, their very design became a burden. The pack strategy that once conquered bison failed against deer that darted like ghosts through forests. Hunger grew sharper, and their voices grew fewer, until one day the howls faded entirely from the living earth. But do they truly vanish? Or do they live on within us, within the dogs that now lie at our feet, within the stories we continue to tell? When you watch wolves in the wild today, running in packs, nipping at the heels of elk, their yellow eyes flashing in the dusk, you are seeing a fragment of that ancient memory. You are witnessing a survival strategy written in the bones of time itself. When your dog curls at your side, loyal and watchful, you may be feeling the faintest echo of a direwolf spirit, a reminder of a bond between hunter and hunter, forged long before fire was mastered. The hunting strategies that kept them alive were never just about food. They were about connection. They were about listening, waiting, moving as one body across an endless world of cold and hunger. They were about survival not of the strongest alone, but of the group, of the family. That lesson lingers still. In every story of cooperation, in every tale of humans who work together against impossible odds, in every whispered myth of wolves that guide or guard, the spirit of the direwolf stirs like embers in the dark. And so the question returns, quiet but unyielding. How does a creature survive when the world itself seems designed to erase it? The direwolves answered in the only way they could, through patience, through unity, through strategies of mind and muscle woven together like threads of a net cast across the Ice Age world. They survived not by chance, but by choice, by instinct honed into art. And though their bodies are gone, their song remains, faint in the wind, waiting for ears willing to hear. Beneath the weight of time, there lingers a question. How did the direwolves, giants of the canine world, managed to endure in a land so unforgiving, where even the mightiest beasts fell silent. It is easy to imagine their bones lying beside the saber-tooths, the mammoths, and the ground sloths, swallowed by the earth and forgotten. Yet for more than 100,000 years, the direwolves did not vanish. They thrived. The secret to their survival lies not in size alone, not in strength alone, but in the quiet, unspoken skills that turned them into masters of endurance. Their story is not only theirs, it belongs to every creature that has ever faced hunger, cold, and uncertainty. It belongs, too, to us who find pieces of ourselves in their struggle. Picture, if you will, an ice age plain stretched wide and endless. The wind is sharp, heavy with the scent of frost and dust. Snow crunches underfoot, though patches of frozen mud glisten where mammoth herds have trampled paths. The air carries the musk of bison, the acrid tang of urine from elk, and the faint metallic note of blood lingering where predators have left their marks. Across this raw stage, the direwolves move, thick-furred, broad-headed, shoulders rolling like waves. Their amber eyes catch the pale fire of the low sun. They do not walk as individuals. They walk as one body, breathing in unison, their paws falling in a rhythm that seems eternal. Their survival began with this unity. Alone, even the strongest wolf would falter against a bison's horns or a horse's kicking hooves. Together, they became something greater. Imagine the sound of their voices lifting into the frozen night, not the thin, reedy howl of the smaller gray wolf, but a deeper chorus, heavy and resonant, a sound that rolled across valleys and carried through forests like the toll of an ancient bell. That call was not only a summons, it was reassurance. It told each wolf, you are not alone. It told rivals, we are many. It told prey, run if you dare, but you will not escape. Their hunts were lessons in patience. The direwolves did not rush blindly into danger. They read the land as if it were a language. They studied the snow, noting where it had been crushed by hooves, where it was stained with dung, where trails split and converged. Their noses, damp and quivering, sifted scents apart as a skilled hand separates threads from a tangled skein. They could taste the air and know how long ago a herd had passed, whether a calf lagged behind, whether sickness weakened a cow. These skills were honed not by chance, but by necessity. In a world where meat spoiled quickly and starvation hovered close, the direwolves became masters of calculation, weighing risk against gain with every breath they drew. Even when prey was caught, survival demanded more than a kill. The direwolves learned to share. Their powerful jaws could crush bone, splitting marrow rich with fat and warmth, but no single wolf could eat enough to thrive on its own. Around a carcass, order prevailed. The leaders fed first, then the rest in turn, each one knowing that tomorrow, they might be the hunter who falters, the hunter who needs the pack to wait. This was their greatest skill, the understanding that survival was never solitary. To live, they had to trust one another more than they trusted the world itself. Yet their survival was not only physical. It was written into their senses, sharpened until each detail of the world spoke a message. The crunch of brittle grass under frost told them if prey was near or far. The sting of smoke in the wind warned of human fires, which brought both opportunity and danger. The faint vibration through the earth, felt in their paws, whispered of herds on the move. Even silence had meaning. When the birds stopped calling and the small scurrying of rodents ceased, the direwolves knew a predator larger than themselves was near. Their awareness of these subtleties, what we might call intuition, was as vital as muscle or tooth. To the humans who shared those landscapes, the direwolves were more than animals. Around campfires, flickering against walls of rock and hide, stories were told of the great wolves that shadowed them. Some feared them as demons of the snow, spirits with burning eyes. Others revered them as guides, their voices in the night teaching men how to hunt, how to endure. In carvings on bone, in pigments brushed onto cave stone, wolves and men appear side by side, both hunters, both survivors. Perhaps early people saw in the direwolf a reflection of themselves, a creature bound to kin, surviving not through solitary strength, but through loyalty and cunning. The line between myth and truth blurred, as it always does when survival itself becomes a story. But what of the direwolves themselves? What did survival feel like in the marrow of their bones? Imagine the press of fur against fur on bitter nights, warmth shared, breaths rising in slow, foggy unison. The taste of blood hot on the tongue after days of hunger, flooding the body with relief as fat dripped onto the snow. The ache in their limbs after a chase that stretched over ridges and rivers, muscles trembling yet spirits unbroken. The smell of rot when carrion was all they had, and the willpower to eat it anyway. The sting of wounds, the rasp of rough tongues cleaning them, the quiet endurance of pain because tomorrow's hunt would come no matter what. Their survival was not glorious. It was harsh, unyielding, but it was life, and they took it in full measure. As centuries unrolled, climates shifted, prey came and went, and new rivals emerged. Saber-toothed cats lay in wait with their silent, sudden strength. Bears rose on hind legs, colossal and terrible. And then, most strangely of all, humans grew bolder, their tools sharper, their strategies uncanny. The direwolves adapted. They learned when to avoid, when to challenge, when to shadow human hunters in hopes of scraps. Their survival skills were not fixed. They were fluid, shaped by every trial the world set before them. In that lies another secret. To survive is not only to endure but to change. And so the direwolves thrived, weaving themselves into the great fabric of the Ice Age, a fabric thick with threads of danger and wonder. Their howls stitched across valleys, their paw prints pressed into mud that hardened into stone. They were more than beasts. They were teachers, showing what it means to persist when the odds lean heavily against you. Even now, long after their last voices faded into silence, we find their remains in tar pits and frozen ground. Their skulls, broader and heavier than any wolf alive today, still carry the shape of their strength. Their teeth, worn yet formidable, speak of marrow cracked open and meals won through grit. Scientists study these relics, brushing away soil, weighing bones, measuring jaws. But beyond the numbers lies a deeper truth, that the skills which carried direwolves through storms and scarcity are not foreign to us. We too survive through community, through patience, through awareness of the smallest signs. We too endure by leaning on one another when the world grows cold. Listen closely, and you may still hear them. In the rustle of leaves when a pack of modern wolves moves through the forest. In the low wind across an open plain. In the rhythmic beat of many feet traveling together. The direwolves are gone, yet their story is not. Their survival lingers as memory, as lesson, as reminder. Strength is not enough. To thrive, one must listen, one must adapt, one must trust in bonds that outlast hunger, fear, and time itself. And so the story drifts forward, like breath on a winter night, never fully ending, only folding into the long, endless tale of life itself. What remains of a creature once so mighty that its shadow lingered over 2 million years of Earth's story? That is the question whispered in the quiet halls of museums, in the careful brush strokes of paleontologists, and in the hushed breath of storytellers by a fire. The direwolf, an animal that no human has ever truly seen alive, still prowls our minds. Though its bones lie in tar pits and sediments, its spirit runs across pages, across screens, and through the blood of modern science. We have never forgotten them, even though they vanished nearly 10,000 years ago. Perhaps it is because direwolves carried something more than muscle and teeth. They carried the weight of survival itself. Imagine a night deep in the Pleistocene. The sky is heavy with stars, the air sharp and cold, smelling faintly of pine sap and wet earth. A herd of bison stirs restlessly, their warm breath rising like smoke against the wind. Then, almost silently, a pack moves out from the treeline. Shadows, broad shoulders, thick fur, eyes that glint like coals in the firelight. The direwolves circle, larger than the wolves we know today, with a kind of patience that feels almost human. They wait, and then with a low growl, the chase begins. The thudding of hooves, the snapping of jaws, the wild cries of beasts locked in the dance of life and death. This was their world, harsh, unforgiving, but full of balance. When people first discovered their remains, preserved in the sticky death traps of the La Brea tar pits in California, the bones spoke of something powerful, almost mythical. Skulls thicker and jaws heavier than those of gray wolves, teeth built to crush and tear. The direwolf was not just a predator, it was an emblem of endurance. For centuries, humans have been fascinated by the creatures that survived where we could not, that thrived where we would falter. And yet, they too disappeared. Why? Science gives us answers in fragments. Climate shifted, ice retreated, the great herds they hunted dwindled. Humans entered the picture with weapons, fire, and an expanding hunger for the same prey. The direwolf, bound so tightly to its pack and its way of life, could not bend far enough to the new world. The gray wolf, smaller and more adaptable, slipped into the cracks of survival. The direwolf's deep chest and crushing jaws became relics of an age fading into silence. But extinction is not the same as disappearance. For even as their bodies turned to bones and their bones turned to artifacts, direwolves carved themselves into the imagination of humankind. Long before scientists named them Canis dirus, storytellers were already conjuring giant wolves that stalked the night. In myths, in cautionary tales, in whispered warnings to children not to stray too far from the fire, the direwolf lived on. The smell of smoke, the warmth of a wool blanket pulled tight, the eerie cry of a real wolf carried across the hills. These were the conditions under which the direwolf's legend thrived. Modern science has given new life to that legend. With genetic studies, we have discovered that direwolves were not simply oversized gray wolves as once believed. Their lineage branched away more than 5 million years ago. They were something older, something apart, a parallel wolf that ruled a different path of evolution. This knowledge shifts them from curiosity to mystery. When we touch their skulls behind museum glass, when we trace the ridges of their fossilized teeth with our eyes, we are not looking at a familiar cousin, but at a stranger who once shared our earth. That strangeness carries weight, and yet, imagination has bridged the distance. Modern culture has resurrected direwolves in novels, films, and games, granting them a mythic stature that even mammoths and saber-toothed sometimes lack. They appear as symbols of loyalty, ferocity, and the untamed wild. When writers cast them beside kings or make them guardians of ancient families, they echo what the bones suggest, that these animals were more than solitary hunters. They were creatures bound together, depending on one another in ways that mirror our own human bonds. There is something deeply human in the way we keep resurrecting them. Perhaps because we see ourselves in their story. The direwolves were pack animals. We too are creatures of community. Their survival depended on trust, coordination, and shared effort. So does ours. When the cold wind bit into their fur and hunger hollowed their bellies, they did not give in alone. They gave in together, or endured together. It is no wonder that when we tell stories of them now, we imagine them not just as beasts, but as companions, as allies, as reflections of ourselves in another form. Stand inside a museum hall for a moment and close your eyes. You hear the soft shuffle of shoes on polished floors, the whispers of visitors reading plaques aloud, the distant hum of a climate control system. But if you stay still long enough, imagination begins to layer over reality. You smell damp earth, the musk of animals, the copper tang of blood carried faintly on wind. You hear heavy paws pressing into soil, the low rumble of a growl building like thunder. That is the sensory power of the direwolf's legacy. Even without flesh, even without fur, they fill the senses. They remain tactile in memory. Science gives us practical tools for dealing with such mysteries. DNA studies separate what is myth from what is measurable. Fossils allow us to map their bodies, to reconstruct their movements, to imagine how their muscles flexed under thick coats of fur. But imagination fills the spaces science cannot. No microscope can show us what it felt like to stand in their presence, to hear their howls echo across a frozen valley. For that, we turn to stories, to film, to art. Together, fact and imagination weave the full legacy. There is a symbolic weight to them as well. The direwolf's extinction is a reminder that strength alone does not guarantee survival. They were larger, stronger, and perhaps braver than the wolves who outlived them. But they were less adaptable. For us, this is more than history, it is a lesson. We too live in a world of change, where old certainties vanish and new climates rise. To remember the direwolf is to remember the cost of rigidity, the danger of being too finely tuned to one world when the next arrives suddenly. Psychologically, we are drawn to the direwolf because they stir both awe and sorrow. Awe at their power, sorrow at their loss. That blend of emotions deepens their hold on us. When we read about them, we imagine their fur bristling beneath our hands, thick and coarse, smelling of wildness and smoke. We picture the taste of air sharp with snow, the silence that falls after a kill, the warmth of bodies pressed together for survival. These sensory visions pull us close, make them feel real again, and in that closeness, their story becomes part of our own. In a way, direwolves have never left us. Their bones lie beneath the earth, their names live in scientific papers, their images walk through our stories. When children sit by a fire and hear tales of giant wolves that once roamed the world, they are hearing echoes of something true. When researchers lift fragile fossils from the ground and brush away the dust of 10,000 years, they are not just handling bones, they are touching the continuity of memory. And when writers or artists place direwolves in worlds of fantasy, they are not creating from nothing. They are resurrecting a ghost that already lingers in the human imagination. Close your eyes again. The fire crackles, sparks snapping into the night. You taste the wood smoke at the back of your throat, feel the rough weave of a blanket under your fingers. Somewhere, far away, a real wolf calls, its voice stretching thin across the hills. And in that moment, if you let your mind slip, you can almost believe it is not just a wolf, but a dire wolf answering from another age. Larger, stronger, older. A memory made flesh. Science and imagination together have kept them alive far longer than their bones would suggest. They remind us of the fragility of existence and the persistence of memory. They remind us that creatures vanish, but their echoes remain, shaping how we see our world and ourselves. And so, even now, when we speak of survival, of loyalty, of wildness that will not be tamed, we are speaking in the language of the direwolf. Their legacy runs like a hidden river beneath our culture, quiet, steady, unstoppable. Whether through fossils, myths, or stories told by the fire, the direwolf remains a companion at the edge of the human journey. Not alive, yet not gone. Always waiting in the shadows of imagination, watching us, reminding us that the bond between earth, animal, and human is older than memory, older than words, older than time itself. What kind of world did the direwolf rule, and how did it feel to live beneath their shadow? It is easy to look at their bones in glass cases, their teeth laid bare, their skulls measured and catalogued, and think of them as relics. But once, they were more than relics. They were breath and heat, they were hunger and howl, they were the steady rhythm of paws pressing through snow that never melted, through forests where the wind sang with ice. The Ice Age world was not a quiet one. It rumbled, it cracked, it shifted. Imagine the ground frozen hard beneath your feet, the horizon painted in gray-white light, and the air so cold it caught in your lungs like smoke. Herds of great beasts moved in dark masses across that pale expanse. Bison with horns sharp enough to tear flesh, mammoths with fur thick as woven blankets, horses with their breath steaming like fires in the dawn. And following them, always watching, were the direwolves. Larger than the gray wolves we know today, with jaws built not just to kill but to crush, direwolves thrived in this land of giants. They were hunters, but more than hunters, they were survivors. They knew the weight of hunger that could last weeks. They knew the trick of shadowing a herd for days until weakness revealed itself. They knew the art of waiting, and when the time came, they did not hesitate. People of that world knew them well, not in the way we know them, through bones and books, but in the trembling of the night when a chorus of low howls rose from beyond the firelight. Imagine sitting at the edge of a camp, a cloak of hides pulled tight against your shoulders. The fire snaps, the smell of burning resin fills your nose, and beyond that circle of warmth, the dark presses close. Then comes the sound, long, mournful notes threading the night, many voices joined into one river of sound. You taste fear then, sharp and metallic on your tongue, though you do not move, because movement draws attention, and the direwolves are always watching. Yet fear was only one part of it. To those early people, direwolves were not only a danger. They were teachers, symbols, reminders of the laws of survival. Some stories carved into bone or whispered around fires may have honored them. The hunters who stalked mammoth and bison would have seen themselves in the direwolf's patience, in its refusal to waste energy, in the loyalty of its pack. The bond of the pack was not unlike the bond of a clan. Both knew that alone survival was uncertain, but together there was strength. Practical knowledge often wore the mask of myth. People might have said the direwolf carried the spirit of winter in its chest, that its breath could summon frost, that its eyes could pierce the heart of any beast. But beneath such stories lay understanding. The direwolf thrived because it adapted, because it endured when others perished. To study the direwolf was to learn how to live. And what did it feel like to see one up close, not as bone but as body? Its fur thick and coarse, layered against the cold, its shoulders heavy and ridged with muscle. The eyes would have glowed amber in the firelight, steady and unblinking, reflecting every flicker of flame. The smell would be sharp, musky, wild, like wet earth, like blood cooling in the snow. To touch it would have been dangerous, but imagine the bristle of its coat, the solid weight beneath the fur, the roughness of a jaw made for cracking bone. The world tasted of smoke and fat when the hunters roasted meat, but for the direwolf it tasted of marrow. They broke bones not just for flesh, but for the rich, fatty core inside, a survival trick that gave them strength when others starved. Their jaws, thick and wide, left scars and fossilized remains that still tell their story. This ability, this hunger not just for the obvious, but for the hidden, was part of why they endured so long. The Ice Age was a time of rhythm, freeze and thaw, abundance and hunger, life and death in endless dance. And direwolves fit into that rhythm perfectly. They were not the strongest beast, not the fastest, not the largest. But they were relentless. They endured across continents, from the frozen plains of North America to the open grasslands that stretched for miles. They followed the great herds, weaving their fate with the fate of their prey. People, too, lived by such weaving. Some nights, they may have trailed direwolves themselves, watching how the pack moved, how they spread out in silence, how they drove prey into a trap. There are those who believe that human hunting strategies were shaped, at least in part, by watching animals like wolves. Perhaps our ancestors' first lessons in patience, coordination, and the hunt were learned not from books, but from watching direwolves circle in the snow. But even then, there must have been a deep unease. To see them succeed was to know your own danger. A pack that could bring down a horse could just as easily bring down a person. Fires were kept burning not only for warmth, but as shields of light, a fragile boundary between human skin and direwolf hunger. Imagine lying in a hide shelter, your body pressed close to others for warmth, and hearing the crunch of snow outside, slow, deliberate. The smell of smoke covers you, but beneath it the scent of blood from a day's hunt lingers. Then silence. Nothing but the drum of your heart and the creak of frozen hides in the wind. That silence is worse than the howling, because silence means watching. Time has a way of changing the balance. The same ice that gave direwolves their world also betrayed them. As climates warmed and great herds dwindled, the direwolves' mastery turned fragile. They were specialists in a world of giants, and when the giants fell, the direwolves followed. Gray wolves, smaller and more adaptable, survived. Direwolves did not, yet their story did not vanish. It lingered in bones pulled from tar pits, in the marks of their teeth on ancient bones, in the faint echoes of their role in human imagination. Even now, when people dream of wolves larger than life, with eyes glowing like fire, they are dreaming of direwolves. Their howls still ride the wind of stories. There is something in us that responds to their memory. Maybe it is the recognition of kinship. The direwolf was not unlike us, bound to the fate of herds and seasons, thriving by cooperation and cunning. Maybe it is envy. They lived with a raw, unbroken strength that we, in our warm houses, no longer feel. Or maybe it is simply the awe of survival itself, the awareness that they lived through a world colder, harsher, and darker than we can truly imagine. Close your eyes and picture it. The sky a pale gray dome, heavy with snow that falls without sound. The air bites at your cheeks. Ahead, the herds move, massive and slow, their bodies stirring up frost like clouds. And somewhere beyond, shadows slip between the trees. Ears pricked, eyes fixed, paws soundless against the frozen earth. The direwolves are there, waiting, their breath steaming, their hunger sharp as the cold. They are not yet bones in a museum. They are alive. They are the rhythm of survival. They are the voice of winter itself. And in that moment, as you stand in that endless white, you understand why people once told stories about them, why they carved their likeness into bone, why they wove their presence into myth. Because in their strength, in their hunger, in their loyalty to each other, they mirrored us. They taught us that survival is not about being the biggest, or even the strongest, but about patience, endurance, and the refusal to yield. When the fire dies low and the night grows long, when the cold presses in and silence falls, that is when the memory of direwolves returns. Not as relics, not as bones, but as breath on the wind, as amber eyes in the dark, as the ancient reminder that the world has always belonged to those who endure. In the hush of the night, when the fire burns low and shadows stretch across the earth, one question has always haunted the human imagination. Where did the direwolves come from? Not the wolves we know today, lean and gray, but their immense, long-limbed cousins whose teeth were forged for crushing bone, and whose presence was said to echo like thunder across ancient plains. They are gone now, only bones and whispers remain, but long ago they walked in step with mammoths, saber-tooths, and the people who looked upon them with both dread and reverence. To speak of their origins is to return to a time when the world itself felt larger, colder, rawer. Ice locked the northern lands, winds carried the sting of glaciers, and forests were young and restless. Imagine the smell of pine sap heavy in the air, mingling with the musk of giant beasts. Imagine the crunch of frost underfoot, the distant cry of ravens circling overhead, and the pale winter light stretching endlessly across a land with no walls. In that place, survival was an art, and nothing came easy. The direwolves belonged to this world as much as humans did, and perhaps more so. Fossils tell us they first appeared hundreds of thousands of years ago, shaping themselves to the rhythms of the Ice Age. They were larger than modern wolves, their jaws broad, their teeth serrated with strength meant not just to kill but to dismantle. They feasted on giant sloths, young bison, and the calves of mammoths, prey so large that hunting them demanded ferocity and cooperation. Imagine the sound, the pounding of hooves, the screams of beasts brought down, the furious chorus of wolves locking their jaws around flesh, bones splintering beneath pressure, so immense it could snap a femur like a twig. Yet direwolves were not only hunters. They were symbols. To early humans, watching them from the flicker of campfires, they were both teachers and omens. Some tribes saw in their great paws the imprint of power, and in their haunting howls the voice of the spirit world. To follow a direwolf's trail through the snow was to read a scripture written by claws. And in caves and on cliffs, charcoal sketches of wolves, with jaws exaggerated, eyes deep and burning, hint that the people of that time could not separate the beast from the myth. Still, there was a problem, one that haunted both humans and wolves alike: how to survive the endless hunger of the Ice Age. Food was scarce, the cold relentless, and every breath felt stolen from the jaws of death. People, in their furs and hides, huddled together for warmth. Wolves huddled too, their bodies pressed in tight circles, steam rising from their coats as they waited for the next hunt. And sometimes, their paths crossed in ways both perilous and profound. Stories passed down through generations spoke of the uneasy dance between direwolf and man. At times they competed, circling the same herds of bison, each waiting for the other to make a mistake. A human spear could pierce hide, but a wolf's teeth could finish what the spear began. Sometimes, when the air filled with the iron scent of blood, they met at the kill, eyeing each other across steaming entrails, deciding silently who had the right to feed. Some say that in those moments, when men and wolves faced each other in the half-light, an understanding grew. Neither side could afford endless war. Practical minds among humans found ways to turn fear into alliance. A scrap of meat thrown to the edge of the fire, a bone tossed into the dark. Slowly, ever so slowly, the fiercest wolves learned that humans were not only rivals but a source of sustenance. Perhaps the direwolves themselves resisted this bond, for they were creatures of strength, too wild to kneel. But their smaller cousins, wolves more flexible, less massive, lingered near. And from that nearness, over countless winters, came partnership. But direwolves remained on the edge of human life, close enough to be admired, feared, painted into tales, yet distant enough to remain spirits of the wild. Around fires, people would whisper of them as guardians of the dead. Some believed the howl of a direwolf was the call of ancestors, guiding souls through the icy void. Others said to dream of a wolf was to glimpse one's own death or rebirth. In these whispers, the wolf was no longer just a predator. It became a mirror of human struggle. Think of a night when the sky was fractured by stars, brighter than any city sky could ever allow. A child nestled against their mother, the fire crackling, the smell of smoke clinging to hides. Outside the circle of flame, the long, low howl of a direwolf rose, carrying across valleys. The child shivered, not from the cold, but from the strange stirring in their chest. The sound was frightening, yes, but also stirring, calling forth something wordless and ancient. In that sound lived awe, and awe is the seed of myth. The senses stitched the wolf into memory. The sight of its yellow eyes gleaming from the shadows. The sound of its padded feet, breaking the silence of snow. The touch of its fur, found later in pelts stripped from a kill, dense, coarse, warmer than any deer hide. The smell of its musk clinging to the wind, sharp and earthy, reminding hunters they were not alone. Even the taste of its flesh, for in lean times people ate what they must, bitter and stringy though it was. All of these details became threads in the tapestry of human survival and imagination. Yet direwolves were not eternal. As the ice retreated and forests spread, their reign began to wane. Smaller prey replaced the giants they once relied upon. Their size, once their strength, became a burden in a world that favored swiftness and adaptability. The very landscape shifted beneath their paws, and with it, their place in the balance of life. Humans too grew stronger, their weapons sharper, their bond with more adaptable wolves deepening. And so, over thousands of years, direwolves faded from flesh into fossil, from reality into legend. But they never truly disappeared. Their bones still lie in tar pits and caves, whispering of battles fought and lives endured. Their presence lingers in the stories we tell, in the symbols carved into stone, in the primal shiver that runs through us when we hear a wolf's howl even today. They became not just a memory of the ancient world, but a part of human identity. To speak of direwolves is to speak of ourselves, of hunger and courage, of fear and reverence, of the delicate pact between survival and imagination. Even now we sense them. Walk through a forest at dusk, when the light softens and the air grows cool. The scent of damp leaves clings to you, and the crunch of your steps echoes farther than it should. In the stillness, when every sound seems amplified, you may hear a rustle or a low growl that isn't there. That is the ghost of the direwolf, stitched into the very fabric of our senses, reminding us that the world once teemed with creatures far greater than ourselves. Perhaps that is why we keep returning to them in stories. We conjure them in tales of power and loyalty, in dreams of a wilder earth untouched by fences. Children still thrill at the thought of a wolf larger than life, its eyes burning like coals in the dark. Scholars still study their bones, tracing the curve of their teeth, weighing the size of their skulls, imagining how they moved across the tundra. And storytellers still whisper their names, weaving fact and myth until the two are inseparable. To tell of direwolves is not only to recall an animal long vanished, it is to recall a way of seeing. A time when every sound in the dark might be an omen, when every beast carried the weight of meaning, when survival and imagination were one and the same. It is to step back into landscapes that shaped both wolves and men, landscapes where the air stung with frost, where fire was a fragile shield against endless night, and where the direwolf's howl rose above all, carrying into the stars like a question that has never been fully answered. And so, even as the centuries roll on, even as cities rise and the wilderness retreats, the direwolf lingers, not in flesh, but in the marrow of memory. They are part of the human story now, forever pacing just beyond the edge of the firelight, waiting, watching, reminding us that once the world was bigger, colder, more dangerous, and more beautiful than we can ever truly know. What does it mean to endure when the very ground beneath your paws is shifting, when the air grows colder with each breath, and the herds that once stretched like rivers across the horizon begin to scatter into trickles? This is the question that shadows the story of the direwolves, creatures bound not only by muscle and fang, but by the rhythm of the earth itself. To speak of their survival is to speak of ice and thaw, hunger and abundance, silence and the calls of a pack moving as one body. The world they walked was not fixed. It breathed with cycles of warmth and cold, a lung expanding and contracting with the ages. A meadow could become a tundra within generations, and a forest might vanish beneath the weight of glaciers. Seasons were not gentle, they could sharpen into punishments. To live then, to endure as direwolves did, meant not just chasing prey but chasing change itself. Imagine the pack moving across a frozen plain, the snow crusted hard under their paws, the wind carrying a sting that numbs whiskers and lashes. The air is sharp with the smell of frost and the faint, metallic tang of blood from a carcass long buried in ice. Their ears twitch at the crack of ice in the distance, a shifting reminder that the world is alive, even in silence. To them, each sound mattered, the faint rustle of a hair beneath snow, the heavy drumming of bison hooves, the sudden stillness that warned of danger. The senses were sharpened to the edge of survival, and every decision hung between feast and famine. Yet the climate was no steady friend. Ice ages would swell, locking rivers into white prisons, only to recede and release floods that drowned valleys. Direwolves thrived not because they dominated unchanging lands, but because they adjusted. Their packs learned when to range farther, when to follow mammoths across great distances, when to linger in valleys where elk clustered by the last unfrozen streams. The resilience of direwolves was stitched from their unity, each body part of a larger whole, each howl a thread in a woven song that bound them against the cold. And humans too watched. Around their fires, early people told stories of these wolves that walked larger than life, with jaws heavy enough to snap bone clean. In their minds, the direwolf became more than an animal. It was a teacher, a rival, sometimes a shadow ally. To watch direwolves was to learn patience, to see how cooperation made strength, to understand the hunt as a choreography rather than chaos. When herds scattered, both wolves and humans tasted the same hunger, breathed the same smoky air of frost-bound nights. The resilience of one mirrored the resilience of the other. But the climate tested bonds as much as bodies. When prey dwindled, when snowstorms stretched not for days but weeks, the pack's harmony could fracture. Hunger has a sound. It is the low whine of a pup nudging its mother, the sharp crack of teeth when siblings fight over scraps, the muffled growl of a leader forcing discipline. Hunger has a smell, the sour rot of a carcass too long in the ice, the musk of weakened animals driven to the edges of death. And hunger has a weight, pressing down on the ribs, narrowing the eyes, pushing the pack to test its limits. Yet direwolves endured. They shifted their hunting strategies, circling larger prey even when weakened, waiting with patience by rivers until herds approached, digging beneath snow to find what others missed. Their resilience was not just strength, it was adaptation, the quiet wisdom carried in instincts honed by countless seasons. The climate's shifts were more than physical. They carved stories into the memory of creatures. A sudden freeze was not just cold, it was betrayal by the sky. A sudden thaw was not just warmth, it was the return of hope. Imagine standing among them, feeling the snow sting against your cheeks, smelling the smoke of human fires carried on the wind, hearing the rising howl of the pack. That sound, rising, falling, echoing across the frozen plain, was more than communication. It was a ritual against despair. It was the direwolves telling the earth, and perhaps themselves, we are still here. And humans listened. Around their hearths, they told of wolves who could walk between seasons, who were never crushed by change but folded it into their way of being. To a child listening by the glow of firelight, the direwolf story was not of fear but of guidance. If wolves could endure, so too could their people. And so, direwolves lived not only in flesh but in symbols, painted on cave walls, carved into bone, sung in chants that echoed long after the ice retreated. But what is resilience without cost? Each shift in climate brought both survival and loss. Calves left behind in storms became meals, but herds grown thin meant leaner years. Pups born in spring sometimes never saw summer if the melt failed to bring enough prey. The pack carried these losses in silence, their grief woven into the rhythm of survival. The scent of a vanished pup lingered for days, the sound of a missing howl carried into the cold unanswered. The resilience of direwolves was not without sorrow. The land itself told the story. Glaciers crept forward like slow giants, grinding forests into dust. Valleys filled with meltwater, lakes forming where once there were plains. Direwolves padded across these shifting stages, their prints pressed into soil that might tomorrow be drowned. And always, the test came back to the same truth. Could they endure together as a pack, against a world that was never still? The answer for a time was yes. They grew, they thrived, they spread across continents. They howled in the shadow of mammoths, chased bison across endless prairies, circled sloths larger than any beast we know today. They lived in a time when giants ruled, and they themselves became giants of endurance. The taste of resilience was not sweet. It was bitter with marrow sucked from bones when nothing else remained. It was metallic with the tang of blood on the tongue. It was the smoky taste of frozen air filling their lungs as they ran, muscles burning, frost clinging to their coats. To live was to endure discomfort, and yet there was a strange beauty in it. In the rhythm of their paws striking snow, in the glow of their eyes under starlight, in the chorus of their howls carried across valleys, there was a timeless reminder. To endure is to belong to the earth's endless change. And now, when we stand in quiet museums, looking at the bones of direwolves pulled from tar pits, we feel that story still breathing. The skeletons are not silent. They carry whispers of snowstorms and hunts, of shifting climates that tested every sinew and spirit. They remind us that resilience is not permanent victory. It is persistence, moment to moment, against forces greater than ourselves. In our own time, as climates shift again, we find ourselves facing the same test. We listen to the winds, we watch the melting ice, we see herds scatter and seas rise. And perhaps, somewhere deep in the marrow of memory, the spirit of the direwolf still guides us. It tells us that strength lies not in isolation but in unity, that endurance is not a single act but a weaving of countless small adaptations. It tells us that to live is to keep moving, to keep listening, to keep howling into the winds of change. The story continues, across frozen plains, across warm valleys, across the pages of our imagination. The resilience of direwolves is not just their story. It is ours as well, carried forward, echoing in the spaces where silence waits for a voice to rise. What is it that makes even the strongest creatures falter, not in a single blow, but in a slow unraveling that happens so quietly we do not notice until they are already gone? This is the question that lingers in the shadows of time, the question that trails behind the memory of the direwolf, the great predator of the Ice Age world. For tens of thousands of years, they roamed across the lands of the Americas, their paws pressing deep into snow and mud, their howls rising beneath the silver light of the moon. They hunted mammoths, bison, and wild horses. They guarded their packs with fierce loyalty, and they endured storms and seasons that would have broken lesser creatures. And yet, for all their strength, they vanished. What remained were their bones, locked in tar pits and buried beneath layers of earth. and the stories we whisper as we imagine them walking once more among us. It was not a sudden fall. It was not a single winter too cold, nor a single summer too hot. Instead, it was a series of struggles, like threads snapping one by one until the fabric no longer held. The final struggles of the direwolves were quiet battles against hunger, competition, and change itself. And like all great endings, theirs was marked not only by loss but by the echo of endurance, by the way they clung to life until the very last. The Ice Age was already shifting when their troubles began. The winds that once carried the sting of frost began to soften. The glaciers, vast and gleaming like frozen mountains, retreated slowly northward. Rivers, once clogged with ice, began to surge with meltwater, roaring across the plains. The land smelled different too. Where once there had been the sharp, clean scent of frost and pine, there came the earthy musk of wet soil, the sweetness of new grasses, the budding aroma of flowers pushing through thawing ground. Change was everywhere, visible in the sky, audible in the shifting calls of birds returning to lands they had long abandoned, tangible in the warmth of the sun on fur that had grown thick for harsher winters. For direwolves, whose lives depended on the rhythm of the hunt, the changes brought unease. Their prey, those massive herbivores that had sustained them for millennia, began to dwindle. Mammoths wandered less frequently across the plains, their herds smaller each year. The great bison herds, once dark clouds rolling across the land, thinned to a trickle. Horses, wild and swift, fled from the open fields into tighter forests, where direwolves found the chase more difficult. The taste of meat, once so plentiful, became rarer, and the gnawing hunger in their bellies became a constant companion. A direwolf pack could not survive on scraps, and so they grew restless, turning to new prey, smaller, leaner, and quicker. It was in this narrowing of choices that they met their fiercest rivals. Not the saber-tooths, who too were fading with the disappearance of the great beasts. No, it was the smaller, sharper wolves, the ancestors of the gray wolf, that rose to challenge them. These wolves were not as powerful, their jaws not as crushing, their size not as imposing. But they were adaptable. They could dart into forests, chase deer along winding trails, survive on rabbits and rodents if need be. Their senses were finely tuned, their paws lighter, their packs nimble. Where direwolves needed strength, these wolves needed only cunning and endurance. And as the climate warmed and the old ways of hunting grew harder, it was not brute force that won, but flexibility. The sound of it must have been haunting in those last centuries, the deep, thunderous howls of direwolves, long and mournful, slowly being drowned out by the sharper, quicker cries of their rivals. One could imagine a quiet night, stars glittering coldly overhead, where the air vibrated with two distinct voices. One low and powerful, echoing like the memory of glaciers, the other swift and piercing, promising a new world. The smell of blood on the air would have been the same, iron-rich and sharp, but the hands, or rather the paws, that claimed it were changing. And then there were humans, fragile in appearance, yet armed with cleverness sharper than teeth. They arrived in greater numbers, spreading across the continents, carrying fire and tools of stone, and later bone and antler. To the direwolf, humans must have seemed strange prey at first, thin-bodied, slow, but somehow always avoiding the jaws that snapped at them. They did not simply run. They fought back, working in groups, hurling spears that pierced hide, cutting through muscle and bone. More than that, humans went after the same prey that the direwolves relied upon. Where direwolves needed whole herds to feed their packs, humans could bring down just enough to survive, but in doing so, they disrupted the balance. The smell of smoke and tanned hides filled the valleys. The sound of human voices carried through the forests, strange and melodic, but also commanding, announcing their growing presence. For the direwolves, it was another pressure, another thread stretched thin. And yet, they fought on. Packs clung together, their bonds strong as ever. A direwolf pup would still nuzzle into the warmth of its mother's fur, the taste of milk comforting against the ache of hunger. Young wolves would still play in the snow, their paws leaving small trails beside the heavy prints of their parents. Their eyes, sharp and amber, still glowed in the firelight, reflecting both defiance and fragility. They hunted where they could, chasing elk and deer, stealing scraps from the kills of others, their bodies leaner, but their spirit unbroken. The world was changing around them, but they did not know how to do anything else but endure. What is striking when we imagine their decline is not just the struggle for food, but the sensory weight of it, the gnawing emptiness in their bellies, the dry rasp of tongues dragging across bones already stripped of most flesh. The way the air felt thinner when hunger stretched on too long, every breath sharp with desperation. The way their coats, once full and thick, began to mat and tangle as energy waned. The taste of old meat, carrion rather than fresh kill, bitter and sour on their tongues. The smell of rival packs, stronger now, marking territories direwolves could no longer defend. These were not just battles of body but of spirit, of memory, of identity. For humans who lived alongside them, direwolves became more than predators. They became symbols. To some, they were terrifying, huge, relentless creatures whose howls seemed to summon the night itself. To others, they were teachers, embodiments of loyalty and cooperation, their packs a mirror of human families bound together for survival. Around fires, stories must have been told of wolves with eyes like burning coals, who guarded the gateways between the living and the dead. Their presence was felt not only in flesh but in spirit, and their decline carried weight beyond the loss of a species. It was as if a great guardian of the old world was fading, leaving humans alone in a landscape that no longer echoed with those deep, rolling howls. And so, one by one, the packs disappeared. Perhaps a harsh winter finished one, when the snow crusted too thick for the young to break through. Perhaps another met its end at the edge of human spears, the scent of blood mingling with wood smoke. Others may have merged with smaller wolves, their lines diluted until the distinct direwolf form was no longer recognizable. The tar pits of La Brea in California tell part of the story. Traps of sticky black earth that swallowed direwolves whole, leaving their bones locked in dark silence for thousands of years. From those bones, we learn how broad their skulls were, how crushing their jaws could be, and we imagine the last moments when desperate hunger drove them to risky hunts. The final struggles were not grand battles or dramatic extinctions, but a quiet wearing down, a surrender to a world that no longer fit them. And yet, they remain with us. Their bones whisper of resilience. Their memory lingers in myths and dreams. Their shadow lives on in the wolves and dogs that still roam beside us, carrying faint echoes of the old giants. Even now, when a wolf howls beneath the moon, long and low, it feels as if the direwolves are not entirely gone, but watching from beyond, guardians of a time when strength alone was enough. The air of their world still touches ours when we step into cold forests and hear the crunch of snow beneath our boots, when the smell of pine and frost sharpens our senses, when we feel the electric thrill of being watched in the wilderness. In those moments, the direwolves breathe again, not in flesh, but in memory and story, in the rhythm of life that never truly ends but only changes its shape. They remind us that even the mightiest can falter, not from weakness but from the shifting tides of time itself, and that survival often belongs not to the strongest, but to the most adaptable. And so the story flows on, like the rivers that outlived the glaciers, like the wind that still moves through forests once crossed by direwolf packs. Their struggle was the end of an age, but it was also the beginning of another, a reminder that every ending is carried forward in whispers, in echoes, in the eternal song of the living world. Beneath the long shadows of the Ice Age, where glaciers carved valleys and winds swept across endless plains, a question still lingers in the minds of those who study the ancient world. How did direwolves, creatures larger and more powerful than today's wolves, survive together for so many thousands of years in such harsh lands? The answer lies not only in teeth and muscle, not only in the hunt and the chase, but in something softer, something almost invisible to the naked eye, bonds, woven between them like threads of sinew, pulling their packs close in times of danger, in hunger, in joy, and in grief. These bonds, stronger than ice, stronger than famine, are what allowed direwolves to thrive when the cold world tested every living thing that dared to walk upon it. Imagine a night tens of thousands of years ago. The air is sharp and clear, a silence broken only by the distant cracking of ice on a frozen river. Above, the stars gleam with a brilliance lost to us now, unspoiled by firelight or city haze. In that darkness, shapes move low across the snow. Their breath steams in the air, visible against the moonlight. The direwolves, heavy-bodied and broad-headed, gather close. One nuzzles the side of another, their muzzles brushing in quiet reassurance. These gestures may appear small, but they are the language of loyalty. Each touch, each glance, reinforces the trust that binds them. The cold world demanded unity. Alone, even the strongest direwolf could fall prey to hunger, injury, or ambush. Together, they became more than predators. They became a living net of strength. The pack was their shelter, their warmth, their shield against loneliness in the vast emptiness of the Pleistocene. Where mammoths thundered across the plains and saber-toothed cats prowled, the direwolves relied on each other, moving as one body, their lives stitched together by instinct and devotion. Early people who watched them must have seen this too. Around fire pits, humans told stories of wolves, some whispered in fear, others spoken with reverence. Hunters saw reflections of themselves in those packs. They knew that survival in such a merciless land was not the achievement of one hunter, but the unity of many. Just as humans leaned on kinship, ritual, and fire, direwolves leaned on bonds invisible, but no less real. A mother's steady care for her young, the loyalty of siblings who grew and hunted side by side, the patience of an elder teaching the rhythm of the chase. These wolves were not silent killers, but animals rich with sound. Listen closely, and you could hear their voices carrying across miles of snow. A chorus of howls rose into the air, harmonizing in layers, each voice distinct yet blending into something greater. To a direwolf, that sound was more than communication. It was reassurance, a signal in the night that said, "We are here, we are many, we are together." The howl stitched scattered members of the pack into a single family, even when separated by distance or darkness. For a lone wolf wandering the edge of survival, that sound was a beacon, pulling it back into the circle of belonging. What must it have felt like to be inside that circle? Picture the warmth of bodies pressed together in a den, fur against fur, the steady beat of hearts pulsing like a shared drum beneath the ribs. Imagine the smell of musk and earth, of raw meat carried home from the hunt, the scent that told each member where they belonged. The taste of the kill, divided among many mouths, was not just nourishment, but a ritual of equality. To tear into the same flesh was to affirm the invisible pact of kinship. These moments of closeness had power far beyond survival. They shaped minds. A pup raised in such a world grew not only to hunt with strength, but to feel with memory. To remember the warmth of its mother, the playful nips of siblings, the guiding nudges of elders, was to carry forward the pattern of belonging. It was a cycle, renewed in each generation, a memory embedded in bone and instinct. But bonds are not always soft. Sometimes they are tested in fire and blood. Hunger could strain them. When winters dragged on too long, and herds migrated beyond reach, tension pulsed beneath the surface. The pack still hunted together, but ribs showed beneath fur, tempers flared, and the closeness that once comforted could ignite into snarls. Yet even in those trials, the pack endured, because breaking apart meant death. They learned to bend but not break, to fight among themselves but still stand united when the mammoth or bison was brought down. The cultural echoes of these bonds seeped into human imagination. Ancient people painted wolves on stone, carved their likeness into bone, told myths where wolves stood as guides, protectors, or threats. Some believed the wolves guarded the spirit world, that their howls carried souls to the stars. Others feared them as omens, believing their presence foretold battles, famines, or deaths. But whether feared or revered, the wolves' unity impressed itself deeply on human thought. To watch a pack move across the snow was to witness an ancient truth. Survival is not strength alone, but strength shared. If we close our eyes, we can almost place ourselves there. The crunch of frost beneath paws, the glint of moonlight on yellow eyes, the low growls vibrating through the air before the sudden, coordinated rush of bodies in motion. A bison stumbles, pulled down not by one but by many. The earth trembles under hooves, the air fills with the coppery tang of blood. And then silence, broken by panting, by the tearing of flesh, by the soft whimpers of pups nudging their way forward to claim their share. Around this scene lies not only survival but the bond itself, reaffirmed in the feast. We might imagine that in quieter hours, when bellies were full and the world grew still, direwolves rested not as scattered beasts but as a tangle of limbs, ears twitching, tails brushing. Some would keep watch, eyes glowing faintly in the dark, while others slept. A mother might lick clean her young, soothing them with the rasp of her tongue. A sibling might press closer, nose tucked into another's ruff. These moments, so ordinary, were the threads that wove their survival, more enduring than fang or claw. There is also the mystery of loss. What happened when a pack member did not return from the hunt? Did the others search, calling out across the night with their voices stretched thin? Did they linger near the body of a fallen one, noses pressing, refusing to leave until hunger drove them on? We cannot know for certain, yet traces of this tenderness have been seen in modern wolves, who have been known to mourn, to howl for the absent, to remember long after. If modern wolves hold grief, how much deeper might it have run in direwolves, whose survival hinged so tightly on the family bond? As ages shifted and climates warmed, the world began to change beneath them. The vast plains shrank. The great herds dwindled. Competition grew fierce. Humans spread wider, bringing with them new tools, new weapons, new ways of altering the land. For the direwolves, bonds were no longer enough to secure their place. Still, they clung to each other, even as the world narrowed around them. And though their bodies fell into silence, their memory remained, buried in tar pits, preserved in bone, carried in the myths of countless peoples. In the present day, we stand far from that frozen age, yet their lesson lingers. The echoes of their howls still stir something deep within us, something we recognize not with reason, but with instinct. We too know the warmth of gathering close, the strength of shared burdens, the comfort of a voice calling out in the dark. We too understand that survival, whether on icy plains or in modern cities, depends not only on the individual but on the bonds we form. Close your eyes and listen. The wind might carry, faint and far away, the rhythm of ancient paws drumming the ground, the murmur of voices blending in a chorus of loyalty. Smell the cold air, sharp and clean, mixed with musk and earth. Feel the brush of fur, the steadiness of another heartbeat beside your own. Taste the bitterness of hunger and the sweetness of the shared feast. See the glow of eyes, the shimmer of snow, the endless horizon stretching before a pack that moved as one. The direwolves may be gone, but their story lives on in every memory of kinship, in every tale told around firelight, in every heartbeat that quickens at the sound of wolves howling in the distance. For in their bonds, we recognize our own. And though the ice has melted and the world has shifted, that truth remains as steady as the stars that once shone down upon their packs. How did the direwolves first rise to the throne of their wild dominion? The question has lingered in the quiet spaces of human thought for centuries, whispered in caves, repeated around fires, painted across the stone walls of memory. They were not ordinary wolves, nor just beasts of the cold plains, but something larger, heavier, shadowed with an authority that made even men pause before the forest's edge. To understand how they became the apex predators of their age, we must look back to landscapes so old that they no longer breathe in their original form, yet their echo still lives in the ground beneath our feet. Imagine the world not as it is now, but as it was, an endless sprawl of frozen valleys, tundra fields glittering beneath pale suns, forests that stood silent and deep with snow weighing their branches. The air was sharp, each breath cut like a blade in the chest. The ground trembled with the movement of enormous creatures, mammoths, mastodons, sloths taller than a man, and bison by the thousands. A land of giants demands predators worthy of their prey. Into this theater of survival stepped the direwolf, strong-limbed, broad-jawed, their teeth curved like white scythes. They were not born kings, but forged into them by hunger and competition. It is said that their emergence began in the southern lands, long before the great glaciers spread their icy fingers down from the north. They carried the blood of earlier wolves, but with every hunt, every hard winter, every failure and triumph, they grew larger, stronger, more cunning. The bones unearthed in tar and ash tell us they were built heavier than their kin. Deep chests for endurance, thick skulls for crushing bone, shoulders that carried the strength of survival itself. But bones alone do not speak of spirit. For that, we must lean into the stories told by those who came later. Humans, small compared to the beasts, yet endlessly watchful. The first people who walked those frozen fields did not see the direwolf as just an animal. They saw a rival, a teacher, a shadow moving in the same direction as their own kind. For what was a direwolf pack but a mirror of a tribe? Each moved with purpose, with hierarchy, with unity that turned hunger into power. The humans learned by watching. They saw how direwolves circled the great bison, how they lunged in rhythm, one to distract, another to wound, another to bring the prey to collapse. They saw how loyalty bound them, and in their own hunts, they borrowed those lessons, whispering to one another in the snow, taking courage in numbers. The direwolves became, in this way, more than predators, they became symbols. Their howls rolled across the plains like thunder, shaking hearts in the night. To hear them was to know two things at once: awe and fear. Children were hushed with warnings that direwolves carried off the careless, and yet they were also told that the wolf's strength lived in the hunter's spirit. Carvings in antler and stone show their likeness, jaws wide, bodies stretched in motion. To paint them was not simply to describe them. It was to ask for a share in their power. Still, their rise was no easy tale. Direwolves lived in a world with rivals just as fierce. Saber-toothed cats stalked the same herds. Bears, towering and merciless, claimed territory with swipes of claws that could split a skull. Even men, clever with fire and flint, cast long shadows over the land. And so the direwolves grew wise, shaped not only by their own nature, but by the constant contest with others. Picture them waiting on the edge of a frozen clearing. The air smells of iron and musk, the herd ahead shifting nervously, steam rising from their nostrils in the cold. The direwolves crouch low, their paws sinking into crusted snow, their ears twitching to every sound. They do not rush blindly. They wait for the signal, the shift of a matriarch's tail, the bellow of a bull. Then they move, not as individuals but as one body, jaws flashing, claws tearing, breath hot and white against the night air. The ground shudders with the struggle, hooves thundering, bones breaking. In the end, the pack feeds, warm blood staining their muzzles, and the silence of the frozen world resumes. For humans watching, the sight was both lesson and omen. They learned which prey to chase, which to avoid, how to surround, how to exhaust. But they also told stories of spirits, wolf spirits that guarded the forests or hunted men as easily as deer. Around the fire, they described the smell of direwolves, musky sharp, a scent that clung to fur and lingered in the air long after the beasts had passed. They spoke of eyes that glowed like embers, reflecting the stars. They described the sound of bone crunching in direwolf jaws, a sound that haunted dreams, for it reminded them of their own fragility. And yet, there was also reverence. Some tribes placed wolf teeth in the mouths of their dead, believing the spirit of the predator would guard them in the journey beyond. Some wore pelts as cloaks, not only for warmth but for courage. To drape oneself in the hide of a direwolf was to claim a fragment of their throne, to walk in step with the kings of the hunt. As apex predators, direwolves were not merely takers of life, they were balancers of the great cycle. By preying on the weak, the sick, the slow, they kept the herd strong. Without them, the bison might have overrun the plains, the elk might have stripped the forests bare. Every kill left remains, and every remain fed others, ravens, foxes, beetles, even the soil itself. They were feared, yes, but their rule was also necessary. The question, then, is not only how they rose, but why they endured for so long. Perhaps the secret lies in their unity. A single direwolf could not bring down a mammoth, but a pack, disciplined, patient, bound together by hunger and loyalty, could do the impossible. It is said that when direwolves hunted, you could feel their determination like a presence in the air. The hair on the back of your neck would rise before you even heard their paws. The taste of fear was metallic on the tongue, sharp and bitter, as though the very air knew the outcome of the chase. But as strong as they were, time moved against them. The climate shifted, prey grew scarcer, and men grew bolder. Fire, arrow, spear all tipped the balance. Yet the memory of their reign lingered. Even after they were gone, their bones entombed in tar pits, humans remembered. They told children that the direwolves still roamed in spirit, that their howls were carried in the wind. In dreams, they said, direwolves stalked the sleeping, not as enemies, but as reminders of the old laws. Unity, strength, patience, the hunger that drives life forward. And perhaps, in a way, direwolves never truly vanished. Look to the wolves that still move across northern forests, leaner and smaller, but carrying the same glint in their eyes. Listen to their howls echoing across valleys on winter nights. Feel the way it chills the skin, yet also stirs the blood, calling to something deep within. It is as though the direwolf lives on, not in bone and flesh, but in memory and shadow, woven into the human heart. Their story is one of emergence through trial, of survival shaped by struggle, of a throne won not by chance but by endurance. They rose because the world demanded it, because the prey was mighty, because the rivals were deadly, because only the strongest and the most unified could stand atop the frozen kingdom. They remained because they embodied something timeless, something that men recognized as kinship and rivalry both. And so, when you think of them, do not picture only a beast with fangs and fur. Picture the flicker of firelight against cave walls, where hands painted their likeness in ochre. Picture the silence of a snowy plain broken by the first rising howl. Picture the heat of blood against cold air, the crunch of bone, the musk that clings to the wind. Taste the sharp tang of fear, the bitterness of awe, the sweetness of survival. Feel the weight of eyes watching from the treeline, steady, patient, eternal. For the direwolf was never just an animal. It was a chapter of the world's memory, written in teeth and snow, in shadow and firelight. And in that memory, it still walks beside us, still hunts in the corners of our minds, still waits in the spaces between our heartbeats. Have you ever wondered what it was like to walk the earth when the world itself seemed sharper, colder, hungrier? When each day was less about living comfortably, and more about surviving against forces older and wilder than anything we can now imagine. Picture this, a night sky the color of obsidian, scattered with a spray of unfamiliar stars, and below it a land where every shadow hid a predator, and every sound in the distance could mean life or death. It was in this world that the direwolves moved, vast shapes of muscle and bone, their paws pressing into frozen earth, their breath steaming in the cold air like smoke from a fire. They were not alone in this landscape. Around them prowled their rivals, the saber-toothed cats with their terrible fangs like ivory blades, and the first bands of humans, frail in body but carrying sparks of cunning that would one day burn brighter than any fang or claw. The question hangs in the air like the echo of a howl. When direwolves met their rivals, what balance of fear, strength, and wit decided who lived and who was swallowed by time? To understand, let us walk slowly into this Ice Age world. Feel the crunch of frost beneath your bare feet, the sting of the wind that slices across open plains. The air is thick with the scent of resin from pine forests, with the musk of animals too large for our modern minds to hold easily. Mastodons, giant bison, mammoths that rumble like moving mountains. Listen carefully. Far off, you hear the rising call of wolves, but deeper, fuller, heavier than those of today. It is a chorus that can rattle your chest and make the hair on your arms rise. This is the voice of the direwolf pack. They lived as shadows bound together, not just hunters, but a family bound by loyalty. Their strength was not only in their teeth, but in their ability to work as one body, flowing like water, circling prey with a patience born of hunger. Against bison or horse they were formidable, but against rivals their fate was less certain. For on the same hunting grounds crept the saber-toothed cats, low to the ground, silent as snowfall. The saber-tooth was not built for the long chase. It was a creature of ambush, its massive forelimbs braced with power, its jaws opening wider than seemed natural, bearing fangs curved like carved stone. Imagine it waiting in the tall grass, the air heavy with the smell of blood from a carcass nearby. Its eyes are pools of gold, unblinking, and when prey, or rival, passes too close, it leaps with the force of a landslide. The bite does not tear flesh the way a wolf's does. It pierces deep, slicing through arteries, silencing life in an instant. For the direwolves, meeting such a creature meant danger in every shadow, yet also opportunity. For where the saber-tooth killed, scraps were left behind, and scraps could mean survival through a lean winter. But here enters the third force, the early humans. Small figures at first, wrapped in furs, their faces painted with ochre and ash, their breath sharp with the smoke of campfires. Their hands clutched stone blades, crude but sharp enough to cut hide, sharp enough to pierce. They did not have the size of a direwolf, nor the teeth of a saber-tooth, but they carried a different kind of weapon, imagination. Their minds were quick, their eyes reading the landscape, their memories passing from one to the next like stories told by firelight. When direwolves watched humans from a distance, they smelled the strange scent of fire in their clothes, the tang of cooked meat on their breath. Perhaps they sensed something uncanny about these creatures who laughed in the darkness and sang to unseen spirits. Humans watched direwolves too, and perhaps they saw more than predators. In the wolves' loyalty, in their ability to stand together, humans may have seen a reflection of themselves. That recognition may have planted a seed, the first whispers of companionship, though in those early days it was as likely to be battle as kinship. Imagine a frozen plain at dusk. A carcass lies torn open, the air filled with the metallic scent of blood, the buzzing of flies that somehow live even in the cold. A direwolf pack circles, their yellow eyes flashing in the half-light. But from the tree line slips a saber-tooth, its shoulders rippling, tail low. The wolves stiffen, hackles rising, growls rumbling like distant thunder. Their paws scrape the frost, nails striking stone. Yet they hesitate, for the saber-tooth is terrible, and its fangs gleam with the promise of death. Then, before the silence shatters, another sound comes, the sharp whistle of a thrown spear, the thud of wood striking ground, the startled snarl of the cat. From the darkness step humans, faces smeared, voices shouting, firebrands waving. Smoke and flame cut across the field like a wall. In that moment, three predators meet, bound by hunger, by fear, by the endless game of survival. The clash of these rivals was not always violent. Often it was a dance of avoidance, each sensing the strength of the other, each choosing caution over risk. A saber-tooth would yield a kill if wolves gathered in numbers too great. Wolves would scatter when firelight appeared. Humans would wait until beasts tore apart a mammoth before daring to move in with flint knives to steal what scraps remained. And yet each carried scars, each bore the memory of lost kin to the claws and teeth of the others. To the humans, these encounters carried more than survival. They grew into stories. Around the fire, with fat sizzling on the flames, they told of the saber-tooth as a spirit of death, a shadow that strikes without warning. They spoke of wolves as spirits of kinship, as guides in the night. The smell of burning wood and meat mingled with the fear in their hearts, shaping myths that would last long after the beasts themselves were gone. The direwolves became symbols of loyalty, of strength in numbers. The saber-tooth became the reminder of sudden loss, of blood spilled too quickly to stop. Think of the sensory world they lived in, the constant smell of damp fur, of animal musk, the taste of half-cooked meat chewed in haste before another predator arrived, the sound of bones cracking under powerful jaws, the feel of icy winds numbing fingers, reminding humans how fragile they were. Against that backdrop, survival was not just physical, it was psychological. Humans needed courage to walk into the dark, wolves needed unity to face rivals, and even saber-tooths needed patience to wait for the perfect strike. Over time, balance shifted. The saber-tooths, masters of ambush, found their prey dwindling. Their great fangs, once tools of dominance, became burdens when smaller and faster animals replaced the massive herbivores. The direwolves endured longer, thriving in packs, their strength carried by cooperation. But it was humans who rose, shaping the world not just with weapons but with fire, with words, with memory. They began to paint wolves on cave walls, not as enemies, but as something closer to kin. The boundary between fear and friendship blurred. Perhaps a pup taken from the wild grew accustomed to the warmth of a hearth. Perhaps a wounded wolf lingered near camp, and humans left scraps of food until it no longer feared them. Step by step, the line between rival and companion faded. Yet imagine the last meetings between direwolves and humans. The pack stands on a ridge, snow swirling, eyes fixed on a group of hunters below. Spears glitter in the firelight. The wolves smell smoke, hear laughter, see children gathered close to the blaze. A choice lingers in the air, to fight, to flee, or to linger at the edges and watch. In that decision lies the seed of all that would come after. The long history of dogs, the bond that turned predators into guardians. But the saber-tooth, that ancient rival, did not live to see such a future. Its voice is silent now, its bones buried deep in tar pits and caves. The direwolf too is gone, their howls no longer echoing across the plains. And yet, when you stand in the woods today, when you hear the call of a modern wolf or feel your dog press its warm body against your leg, you are brushing against the shadow of that old world. The rivalry, the fear, the kinship, it lingers like the faint smell of smoke long after the fire has died. And so the story continues, not only in bones beneath the earth, not only in the myths told by ancient fires, but in the bond we feel today with the animals that once stood as our rivals. The direwolves taught us about strength and unity, the saber-tooths taught us about the swiftness of death, and both taught us that survival is never simply about power. It is about adaptation, about memory, about the quiet courage to face the dark and keep walking. Even now, if you close your eyes, you might almost hear it. The crunch of frost under heavy paws, the whisper of grass parting as a cat crouches, the crackle of fire as humans huddle closer. Three forces circling, testing, surviving. A world both brutal and beautiful, gone but not forgotten, written into the marrow of our bones.